It's 300 odd million, but it doesn't seem to be straightforward. Can you fill us in based on what you've read?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very odd situation. I think there was a lot of interest at the start, Gabby, in Newcastle. And that was for obvious reasons. Obviously, Rafa Benitez was still there at the time. It seemed like just a good investment. They were heading towards, probably in the region of between 20 and 30 million in profit. Newcastle was a very, very appealing proposition. And there was a lot of interest, as you said, 3 years ago. And I think it was probably a little bit over that at this stage. But Mike Ashley was looking to do a very quick deal, and there was 5 groups that signed NDAs and put in letters of intent to move forward. But a lot of them, he wanted to actually complete this deal very quickly in the same way that he bought the club. And just, he's got a different take on how things work from a business perspective to your regular investor. If you're spending that amount of money, you want to do proper due diligence and everything else around it. So obviously, Amanda Staveley was one of those individuals who signed an NDA and an LOI.
Sorry, come on with the acronyms. NDA, I think people understand, is a non-disclosure agreement. LOI, I can assure you, Jules has no idea what you're talking about.
So that's a letter of intent.
Thank you.
Meaning that you will agree to consider the investment, and you're within a certain range depending on how the due diligence pans out. So that's how that works. So there was media reports that were unconfirmed that her group at the time bidded for the club, but it was a low bid, and there was an interview in the Times afterwards, etc. And a lot of it was blamed on Mike Ashley, and that Mike Ashley was a difficult person to deal with, and I think most people accepted that.
Mike Ashley is a self-made man. He's from London, which is relevant here because the Northeast is kind of its own thing. He made a lot of money in sporting goods with his chain of stores, Sports Direct. He bought Newcastle 13 years ago, I think, for around 130 million pounds, something like that. And you kind of get the sense, correct me if I'm wrong, for the last 4 or 5 years, the Newcastle fans haven't exactly been enamored with him. He's not really one of those owners who puts a lot of his own money in or isn't seen that way. Newcastle fans have this idea that they should be, competing, or that they have the heft, because obviously they get big attendances. That they have to go and compete for or close to the top of the table. Many of them do. And the fact that he's an outsider, the fact that he's not very pleasant, the fact that he never speaks in public, all this stuff didn't quite mix. Would you say that's fair?
I think overall, yeah, that's a good description of Mike Ashley in a nutshell. So I think your point about him not being, let's just say, liked by the fans, etc., is a really, really big one here. You've got a massive, passionate one city fan base. So that's the real potential here, along with a modern city centre stadium. So it is a very, very good proposition. And you look at the situation, I think there's been a lot of boycotts by fans of, buying any concessions at games, etc. So that's obviously an initial revenue that will come back to a new owner straight away. And I think any owner who comes in, will be extremely well appreciated initially, because the fans just want Ashley out, which has been made clear. So the other massive opportunity here is in sponsorship uplifts. Obviously, he's used a lot of this to advertise Sports Direct. There was the controversial renaming of the stadium. That all of the advertising everywhere is relating to his operations. And even the shirt deal that they signed with Fun 88 last year is worth between 5 and 6 million, depending on how the club performs. That's probably half of where a shirt deal for a club the size of Newcastle should be. So there's a lot of uplift straight away that's available in this. But back to your original question, I've spoken to 2 sources in Saudi Arabia, and this interest is real. And I know it's been reported that way across the media, but I've heard it from the horse's mouth. The only potential issues that you have here, Gabby, are that you've obviously got to go through the Premier League ownership tests, and who is going to go through that from a Saudi perspective. Obviously, the other thing that I've heard is that they would potentially look at other clubs if the right opportunity was available. So there could be a situation where, a little bit like what happened with Roman Abramovich, who obviously looked at a number of clubs and ended up on Chelsea, you could have a situation where they see something that they like better. And now is a really, really strange time.
Yeah, okay. I want to ask you about that, because how do you... I always thought Newcastle was actually, I mean, given your old business when you were buying and selling clubs, should stress, on behalf of other people.
Yeah.
How do you begin to put a value on Newcastle? Because A, you've got the current pandemic and all the uncertainty that's engendered, with that. And B, it's a bit of an unusual club because, as you said, like, they have massive attendances. It's close to 50,000. Over 50,000. I mean, they nearly sell out every week, which is really good. But then I'm not sure, and I'm sure there's people, there's metrics for this. I don't know how national or international their fan base is, in the sense that they're hugely popular, but they seem to me to be much more of a regional club than, not just a Liverpool or United, but even like maybe a club like Everton. Secondly, Newcastle is not one of the, that area of the country is not one of the wealthier areas of the country. And of course that matters as well. So how do you begin to decide, well, why is it 300 million? Oh, and you always have the risk of relegation, right? So how do you begin to decide? How do you begin to put a number on it?
Yeah, well, actually, I did a PhD on this subject.
Exactly.
And so I came up with a model, and to be honest with you, the 300 million isn't a million miles off. The initial valuation that Mike Ashley had was quite north of that, which was unrealistic. I wouldn't say it was ridiculously unrealistic. I think he was looking for about 450 million, but that was just after the wave of Chinese investors that had come into the market, and there was a little bit of an arms race just to buy up assets that were available. So I think he was a little bit late to the table in terms of that. But overall, I think that the valuation in normal times is fair, but obviously we're not in normal times now. So a lot of clubs could potentially hit the wall here. So that, if you're an opportunist investor, you could actually go in and buy a club that has gone, well, potentially going into administration. So there are other obviously not in the Premier League, but there will be opportunities outside of the Premier League.
And just a very quick follow-up, and then I'll hand over to you, Jules. On this point, because there's always some confusion about this, about billionaires and rich people. It's one thing to be very rich and have lots of wealth and assets. It's another thing to have lots of liquidity. Very rich people, but the Saudis might be slightly different. But most rich people, even if they have 300 million, they don't just keep it in their bank account and then go off and buy something. They generally have it tied up elsewhere. Most assets have depreciated in value, given, unless you're making masks or something, or running Tesco, I guess. So people don't want to go and sell their assets now because they're worth less than what they were before the pandemic. So basically, they have to borrow money. Now, the question is, even very rich people have to borrow money, but the problem with borrowing money is there's just a lot less cash and a lot less money out there that's available. And those people who are willing to lend money, there's people lining up at their door saying, hey, can I have some money? Can I have some money? So there's probably a bit of a credit crunch there as well, meaning that you have to pay more to borrow the money. Again, is that accurate? And could that be part of the reason why maybe the Saudis might be best placed, because they maybe really are sitting on a big pile of cash?
I think there's elements of that. There's a lot of people that have dipped into the regular markets here on that basis, that have money and feel that there's value. Mike Ashley has made no secret out of the fact that most of his wealth is tied up in shares, basically. So, but the danger with the Saudis as well is that they hold so many assets and they own so many different things globally that this could almost get lost in the portfolio. I know it's quite a sexy one, and it gives them global notoriety. But at the end of the day, it could be a plaything for a little while, and then if they're not doing too well, they lose interest.
Tom, you said that the Saudis were also looking at other clubs and other options. From the clubs that we know are available for sale, whether Chelsea is not officially, but maybe United a bit the same. If you were Saudi, if you had all that money, what club for you would be the most appealing?
Effectively, you look at the level of wealth and, let's just say, the resources that are there. You would expect that if the Saudis were coming into the market, that they try and buy the biggest asset that's available. And I don't think this is necessarily available, but most football clubs at the right offer, the owners will sell. And for that reason, I think Arsenal would be the one that would probably be the most interesting to them if they were moving into. I know Arsenal are moving slightly down in terms of their let's just say Premier League status, but they're still a big London-based club. And you mentioned the geographical element earlier on, Gabby. I think that factor comes in to all of this, because let's face it, if you're involved in this from a Saudi perspective, you're probably going to be basing yourself in London and just going up to Newcastle for games.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.